go to the split screen, so you still show me and show the news conference where they can actually see the graphics they're actually using. I do want to go to the phone lines right now. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar is on the phone line with us. We're seeing what's happening with these elections. While we are dealing with the pandemic, you still have elections going on. In Wisconsin, Democrats are desperately trying to push back the primary on Tuesday on April 7th, but the Democratic governor wants to move forward. A few moments ago, a federal judge actually did not agree with them to stop the election, but did put some procedures in place for people to have more time to get absentee ballots. In some states, they're saying we need to go to a completely mail-in election. Senator Klobuchar, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Roland. It's great to be on. I see you actually on the video.
Okay, all right then. All right, didn't realize they had you on video. They told me it was a phoner. This election is a huge piece because, look, the reality is people congregate when you vote. If you have long lines, they're sitting right next to each other. We saw that in the states that voted just a couple of weeks ago. You see people who are trying to get this change in Wisconsin. But you also have it was happening in Georgia where the Republican Speaker of the House actually said that this would be horrible because this will ensure Republicans lose. And so how in the world do we deal with this when we're trying to deal with a pandemic, but you got partisan politics here where we have Republicans who do not want to see mail-in balloting because they actually believe that if more people vote, they lose?
It's unbelievable, and I really appreciate that you're talking about this long-term problem. We know the short term. We've got to get the medical equipment out. Despite all these claims by the White House, we know that so many of our frontline workers don't have medical equipment, that this administration screwed up at the beginning when it came to the tests, and that's resulted in actually the need for more medical equipment because we weren't testing people to begin with to figure out who should be quarantined and who shouldn't. And we will have plenty of time to litigate all that. But right now, we're in the middle of a medical crisis. We're in the middle of an economic crisis, getting those unemployment benefits and help out to the people that deserve it. And we all know that African-American community and our minority communities are so much more hurt by this. They can't go over to some, big house and try to find a room to isolate in. So we've got that going on. But none of this is going to change unless we don't let our democracy function. And that's why, as you've seen these primary elections delayed in so many states like New York for good reasons, we know what's just around the corner, Roland, is the federal election in November. We must allow that to go forward. We voted in the middle of major wars, in the middle of the Depression. We can do this. So that's why I have a bill that's supported by so many major democracy groups, and it would simply allow people to expand vote at home, to expand vote by mail, and to do that by paying for postage, by paying for the envelopes, by getting it out to the people. You are right. We have had some Republican resistance, but we've also had Republican Secretary of States in states like Washington State and Iowa that have said, you know what, we need the funding and we need it yesterday. So that's why in this next group of money, which I think is going to start from the House, Speaker Pelosi is devoted to doing this. We're going to have to need more funding to make it easier to vote. And then for people that still will go to the polls, and there will be people that do that, that's how they're used to voting, we've got to make early voting happen all over the country and happen 20 days in advance so we don't have a massive group of people at the polls at the same time.
But the problem that we have, elections are not federal elections. They're actually state elections. And so doesn't that mean you can pass a bill in Congress, but the states don't have to follow it. They can do what they want to do. So what happens if in one state they say, no, we're not going to do mail-in balloting. We don't care. We're not going to extend early voting. What do we do?
Yeah. So you are right, except what our bill would do is basically demand these states to do these things and to put these reforms in place, and then also to get the funding out there to go with the reforms. What we have done so far is in that last big bill that passed, we did get $400 million. We want $2 billion, $400 million to go out to the states. In the next bill, we will do what we can to get more money, and I believe we will be successful, but also to tie some reforms and then to push in individual states to get that done. But I think it is so ironic as you bring up Georgia. Stacey Abrams would be governor of Georgia right now if we didn't have the guy that's there now, who was then Secretary of State, who enforced the laws in a way that made it impossible for people to vote. And we know we're up against a lot, but that doesn't mean we don't try, Roland. And I don't think you'd be bringing this up on the show if you didn't know that there are Democrats and Republicans that want to be able to vote. We've just got to tear down that roadblock, which are the elected officials in Washington, D.C., and the people across the country. Because I can tell you, a veteran out there, when seniors are at most risk, he wants to vote. A grandma out there who's voted her whole life, she wants to be able to vote. And so that's what we have to work on, is just everyone's desire to not pick between safety and voting.
One of the things that we talk about in terms of the mail-in balloting as well, what's the status of the post office? I mean, I keep seeing these stories that they're talking about they might run out of cash. Will you have workers there? I mean, bottom line is if you're going to do massive mail-in balloting, you got to have a functioning postal office service to do it.
And that is part of the next bill as well, more funding for the post office, because they're set to lose their funding if we don't do anything about it. And so a number of us have been working on that at the same time. I think we can do this. It's one thing. It is still months away. As you know, the Democratic, as you mentioned, Democratic National Convention is now postponed till August in the hopes that we can have some form of a convention. Well, there's every reason to know that we can have an election, but we have to plan ahead. Something that this administration failed to do with this entire pandemic, including getting the testing out when this started in China and getting things approved. Instead, what do? They say, oh, the CDC will handle this. We'll have everyone else stand down. That test got delayed, and look where we are now. They didn't get the equipment out. That's why those of us and the loudest of voices have to stand tall and say, we're not going to let them ruin our democracy. We are going to have an election.
So let's talk about this here. So if we do mail-in balloting, how does it, for people who don't do this, how does it work in that, how do I know my ballot was actually counted? So do I receive something? I mean, how do I know?
Yeah, well, what this has worked very well in some states like Oregon, Colorado. What you do is you get the ballot by mail and then you sign it. You have your signature and then they send it back and then you get something saying it's been received. It's actually worked incredibly well. But let's not be naive. We're not going to be in 8 months changing the whole government so everyone votes that way. Right now, every state has the capability to do this, so we aren't starting from scratch, right? Those absentee ballots. Many people that are watching this right now have sometime filled out those absentee ballots. It's the same idea. It's just that some states make it harder to get those ballots, and we want to expand it. But let me emphasize, and the civil rights groups are with me, one, on supporting this bill. We just did a call with the NAACP and with Senator Wyden and others, and the Leadership Council of strong support for this bill. Because we also have to acknowledge that while we expand at-home voting, we also want to keep the polls and make them safe. So what does that mean? Number one, as I mentioned, early voting for 20 days. But number two, training a whole generation of poll workers. Funding is in this bill for that. We can't rely on our seniors if this virus is still out there in November when they are the most vulnerable to be working at the polls. And so a lot of this is going to get a new generation of poll workers trained to be part of our democracy.
Well, I certainly agree with that. Look, my parents are both 72. They work the polls. They've been doing that for years.
Now, does that surprise me at all when you are their son?
Well, they've been doing it for years, and so we definitely want to keep them safe. And so we'll certainly keep watching this. First, we got to get through the primaries before we even get to what happens in November. Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
It was great to be on again, Roland.
Thank you. Thank you. Keep it up. I want you to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications.